Good evening. Welcome to the November 29th, 2021 meeting of the Stillwater City Council. This time I will call the meeting to order and we will jump right into the agenda. First up under general orders tonight is a presentation of Draft Alternative Transportation Network Study by Confluence Consultants for areas surrounding the 6th Avenue corridor. Ryan Harkins is going to kick us off.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, council members. Ryan Harkins, Community Development. As you may recall, the city contracted with Confluence as the lead for a team to develop a corridor study that focused on active transportation. In other words, in simple terms, bike ped opportunities along the 6th Avenue corridor. This was an area that we identified from Western to Perkins and then from University down to 9th. The consultant project manager is here tonight to present a draft of the study to you and begin to take questions. This is a collaborative effort that we've done with the consulting team as well as community stakeholders over the last few months, and I do believe that you will be impressed with the results. With that, I'm going to introduce Terry Burke-Bigler from Confluence in Chicago.
Good evening, Mayor, members of the council. Pleasure to be with you tonight. Real quick, Ryan mentioned Confluence from Chicago. That's just me. I just relocated to Chicago, but our Kansas City office is the lead office on the project. I'm happy to be here tonight and share this with you. Let me get into full screen view. We've spent some time over the last year with members of your staff, members of the community, and really helped understand what their desires were for the corridor, and I'm anxious to share that with you tonight. I want to remind you who our team was. We'll go over the process that we went through, but really want to dive into the goals and recommendations of the study, where we are today, and then just we're beginning to work through implementation strategies with staff as well. So I've got a lot to go through, so I'll try to get through it quickly. I know you all spent all Saturday night studying this document, so I'm anxious to hear all of your questions, because I know I was preparing for this all Saturday night as well. Again, my name's Terry Burke-Bigler. I'm a principal with Confluence. I did actually, when I started this, was in our Kansas City office, but this past summer had an opportunity to relocate, so have been working out of our Chicago office since then. Chris Shires, our principal planner, Matt Evett, our urban design lead, and Marshall Allen, our project planner, were the Confluence team members that helped me on this. Actually did all the work on this, if I'm being honest. Christopher Kinzel and HDR, they were our transportation planners, so they really helped us develop the active transportation network. And then Dan Gimone, a redevelopment specialist from EPS, they did our market study, and as we started looking at redevelopment opportunities, they did a little bit of a pro forma projection on some of those, and I'll talk a little bit about that as well. As I said, we've been working on this for about a year. We started in January, kicked off in January, and had a number of meetings with an advisory committee, shared their insight and input with us, a couple of public workshops, some online engagement and outreach. And then really a key part of that was meeting with some stakeholders in the project area, folks that represented the OSU Foundation, the museums, business owners on the Strip, and then other key stakeholders throughout the area, some folks involved in downtown and the Main Street area and so forth. And really, getting their input as we're launching this is important. Brought some initial ideas and got some feedback from Planning Commission. And then spent a lot of time working back and forth with your staff and coordinating with ODOT because of the 6th Avenue project that you're all aware they're working on. So the presentation tonight is going to follow the flow of the draft summary plan that we're working on right now. An initial draft of that is being reviewed, and we're fine-tuning that. But it's really broken down into 4 areas of focus. Active transportation is the driver for this. As Ryan mentioned, it's an active transportation study. And as we work through this, that drives where we look at opportunities for redevelopment, because those areas can determine what your network looks like, but they're also then somewhat dependent upon how that network develops. And there's some minor suggestions we're making for land use along the corridor. And then we're going to talk about just the beginnings of urban design strategies for branding and not really branding, but developing an identity for the district or reinforcing an identity. So I'm going to jump into the active transportation. So I'll go through a series of goals and recommendations for each of those focus areas. Goal number one for active transportation was connecting the north and south sides of 6th Avenue corridor. We heard a lot about the need to create safe crossings and work in tandem with ODOT so that we have the opportunity and the community has the opportunity to give input on how those improvements should be constructed when they do their work over the next several years. So we looked at key north-south connections for adding so bike and ped facilities and how we can improve those. And then we also looked at a potential for, out of the conversation came the notion of a potential underpass and thinking about how we can improve the safe accessibility of the school for the neighborhoods, for Westwood Elementary School, for those neighborhoods south of 6th Avenue. And then we'll show you on the plan how we're looking at trying to really improve safety around that school and even all the way out to the west end of the corridor by the medical center and out to Western. And then we wanted to, as a part of this, we're also documenting the opportunity for pursuing rails to trails over by Perkins at some point when those tracks, when it can be negotiated and those tracks can be removed and potential have that as a really nice north-south connector through the community. Goal number two, enhance circulation and connectivity within the corridor. So thinking about how we can improve bike ped facility connections, say from Westwood neighborhood to campus and east over to Main and that area, and as well as through campus. Provide off-street paths around Westwood Elementary. I mentioned that, making that as safe as it can be, and I'll talk about what those facilities can look like. And then coordinating with the university to build out, their network within campus, because it's one thing to build the network as the city up to the edges, but if it doesn't connect through, then it's sort of like the sidewalk to nowhere, the bridge to nowhere. So we want to make sure that these facilities are rolled out in coordination with what the university is doing as well. And then connect downtown to the campus. So, one of the things that I was a little bit surprised at when I first started coming down here and kind of digging into what Stillwater was about and what the community's like. Came down last year, granted it was a COVID year, but during the Saturday before the Texas game. And I was surprised at how little traffic there was downtown and how few restaurants or how few people were sort of waiting on restaurants. Again, it was a COVID year, but it was still, there still were people around, but they just weren't making their way from campus to downtown. So we wanted to look at opportunities to enhance that connectivity for the, economic vitality of downtown and feeding off that university traffic. So we looked at north-south connections and east-west connections. It's a fairly detailed network map. We looked at those key intersections and what we could do with those. The facility types that will be considered as a part of this, so you'll see these terms come up, a multi-street or a off-street multi-use pathway. So you've got some of those today along Western, a 10-foot wide sidewalk, 10-foot wide to 12-foot wide pathway. Advisory lane, so we'll show you some examples of that, but it's essentially something more than a shared facility like you've got some in town on 7th Street west of downtown or 9th Street west of downtown today that are just arrows. Well, by adding a dashed line, you've provided a little bit more visual cue that there are bike lanes or bicyclists there, but it's as a dashed line would be, cars can still drive in that lane. So it's a bit of an alert, but not as much as the next one, which is the full bike lane that's striped or buffered, and then you can see protected, and you can just see how you continue to increase the safety. And we talk about comfort of riders, comfort of bicyclists. So the more you get to the right there, the safer you feel as a bicyclist. And then that separated, so if you compare the one on the left, the multi-use pathway, it's just essentially a wide sidewalk. On the right, you can do a separated side path, which actually demarcates a bike and a pedestrian zone within that. So some of those will show up in this network map as well. Again, I'm not going to go through all of the details on this map right now. I want to kind of hit the keynotes so you can see or understand what you're looking at. First, I'll identify the area of this study is primarily focused within that yellow dashed boundary up to University Avenue on the north, where we jog up a little bit over on the east side of campus, and then down to 9th Avenue on the south, and then Perkins on the east over to Western. So that's really the study area primarily. But when you look at this network, you've got to go beyond that, because you've got to understand the context and how people are getting into this district from other parts of the community. So that's why you see this network map expand out even farther. So we really go up to Hall of Fame. Dashed lines would indicate where we're proposing new facilities. Solid lines indicate where some of those facilities are already in place today. So you can see the pink lines up on Western and Hall of Fame would be those off-street multi-use pathways. So the wide sidewalk, it's extending what's there today in a lot of locations. And you see that, wherever you see that pink line, that's what that would be, is this off-street widened sidewalk. If you see a yellow stripe, that would be your on-street bike lane. So on University Avenue, it's a solid stripe. It's a dedicated bike lane adjacent to the vehicular right-of-way within the roadway. And then if you look at where the green, that would be the shared facility. That's like what you've got today in a lot of locations where it's a share row or shared row arrow facility that might be demarcated with signage and then pavement markings, but bikes and cars share. It's usually on slower traffic roads. And then purple is a special treatment, and those we'll talk about a little bit. Those could be this off-street where it's a demarcated bike lane, pedestrian lane within one 10-foot off-street pathway, or it could be that advisory lane, like I mentioned, and you'll see some of that down at in the downtown area by 7th and Husband Street. You're probably familiar on Husband. There's a study going on as well, or wrapping up, that another firm is developing for bike facilities. So we're integrating that information and coordinating with staff, with Monty and his team, on how that needs to fit into this network to make sure that we're not working in a vacuum there. And then that blue dotted line would be that rail to trail opportunity. And then finally, along 6th Avenue, the red dots indicate where there are existing traffic signals throughout this area. And then the orange circle are the 6th Avenue intersections that we've identified that should have some sort of treatment, something specific that might be wider mixing zones at the intersections where you've got bike and pedestrian facilities crossing 6th. We're not really talking about a lot of expensive pavements and things like that. We're not going into that depth. What we're trying to do is create the space and the pavement marking and facilities that are safer for pedestrians and bicyclists to make the crossings. So I'm not going to go through every intersection, but a couple of key ones that I want to point out. So here at Kings and 6th Avenue, this would be a case where, it's fairly, I would say, straightforward. We're going to coordinate that 10-foot side path on both sides of King that bring neighborhood south of 6th Avenue up to the corridor, and then provide crossing opportunity, and then get you on a 10-foot path that would wrap the school. And that's something we've talked with ODOT, and they're accounting for that in their project. So that's it's sort of a low-hanging fruit, if you will, something that'll be expanded in their scope of work. But we're trying to expand the landing areas at the intersections again, so you've got more room for pedestrians and for bicyclists, so it's not too congested and you feel safe at those intersections. Monroe and 6th Avenue, you'll hear me refer to the Monroe Gateway a couple of times through this. So that's a key intersection that was identified as an important entry point to campus. So from an aesthetic standpoint and a redevelopment opportunity, we think there's something that could be done there. But also from a pedestrian and bicycle connectivity standpoint, connecting you up into that entry corridor into campus. So that's where we're looking at a special facility where it would be off-street shared pathway facility, but it's got the green bike facility separated from the gray concrete pedestrian facility on both sides, east and west of Monroe, as you head north and south across 6th. And then the crossings, you can see the different color of pavement, the different crosswalk pavement treatment. So again, we're really enhancing and reinforcing that as an important pedestrian and bicycle crossing as you cross over 6th. So providing safe space at the corners, so additional mixing area. And then in the northwest corner of that intersection, I'll talk about that a little bit later, but we see that as a gateway opportunity. One of the things we heard was, the foundation early on indicated they felt like there's a real opportunity to make this a better front door to campus. So, that was something we wanted to look at, and what could that mean? And then this advisory lane on 7th Avenue that we're proposing. So now we're downtown. You can see on 7th Avenue between Main Street on the east and Husband. And so this is just one segment to show you what that could look like. And so rather than just putting arrows on the pavement and saying, watch out, bikes may be coming, we want to elevate that. So that's where we're putting in that advisory lane. So it's a dash double line that gives bicycles their own space. And the way that functions, and I'll show you a section that you can see here in a minute, but the way that functions essentially is when a bicycle is in front of you and you're driving, the bicycle has the right of way. You don't cross that lane. And then the cars essentially take the center lane. If there's no bicycle in the lanes, then the cars drive like they normally would in their east and west lane. But it's just, again, it's a visual awareness to make sure everybody understands that bicycles take priority here. Again, it's usually on streets that are slower traffic, narrower places that are safer. You wouldn't put this, say, out on Western or Hall of Fame where it's wider and cars are going faster. And it takes communication. And if you're doing something like this, some communities will do these as a demonstration. So they'll do it maybe temporary markings just so that they can show the community how it works and just monitor the project, see how it goes. If it goes well, great. Make it permanent. If not, it goes away. But it takes communication and an outreach effort when you do something new in the community like this. So this is a scenario of what it would look like if there happened to be bicyclists in both lanes. Then the cars would have to yield their turn. Just like if you're waiting on a bike to pass, you would do that today, but now there's the stripe line to help reinforce that. And then if there are no bikes, then the cars drive the street just like they normally would. And we think 7th is a good place for that because that is a real important connection to downtown. And if you go farther west, then that connects you to Monroe, so it's a good campus connector. We don't necessarily want bicyclists on Main because of the amount of traffic that you have there, and we think bikes ought to come in at the corners, park, and then walk Main for shopping and to get to their destinations. There are, throughout the summary document, we have those types of illustrations that'll document what we're doing at every intersection, every key intersection along 6th, and then those unique situations like at Monroe and 7th Avenue. So that's further detailed in the document. I want to move on to area 2, which is the redevelopment opportunities. So we looked at the 3 areas that are circled in purple here. The first one down, actually in the order of where we're showing them, it would be Campus Corner at the southeast corner of campus. It's just south of the site that's being identified for a hotel convention site. It's where the YMCA sits today at the corner of Maple and Knobloch, right on that corner. And one of the reasons that came up is because we heard it over and over that university and city were looking for a way to create a new entertainment district for students or a new entertainment area, mixed use area. The comment was made that when families bring their student athletes for a recruiting trip, they come, they love the campus, they love the facilities, but what is my under 21-year-old athlete going to do when they're not on campus? There wasn't much there, so we look for an opportunity to provide something like that next to campus that gives them more modern opportunities for entertainment. And then we look at the Strip, and we're really not looking at a redevelopment per se in terms of building and land use, but looking at a reconfiguration idea of the roadway to provide more pedestrian zone. And then I'll talk about the Monroe Gateway again. So Campus Corner. I mentioned the student-oriented entertainment and amenities adjacent to campus. That was really the goal that drove that effort to look at that corner. And also a real opportunity to partner with the YMCA came out of that. And part of what we're looking at is the ability to partner and leverage kind of relationships with businesses that are on the Strip. There may be some businesses there that would like to relocate to new space, we don't know, or they like where they're at, but it's just, rising tide floats all boats. Improve and expand student housing options adjacent to campus, so take advantage of that area over there to provide some newer, more modern housing, similar to what's been built more recently south of campus, but again, promote more density closer to campus, so we're creating that walkable environment, walking and biking. Incorporate active green spaces and pedestrian-oriented spaces. So a space for the residents that live there, could be students, could be faculty that choose to live there, or just residents of the community that don't have an affiliation to campus, but provide a gathering space. It could be something that's used during the week just as a very relaxing space to hang out, but then it can be programmed for events and activities on weekends as well. We look at University Avenue as it extends east of Knobloch. Currently, it's just an undeveloped sort of gravel area. We look at redeveloping that to prioritize pedestrians. And then looking at that intersection of Knobloch and University where the fire station sits today, we think there's an opportunity, if that ultimately is no longer a fire station, the university has identified that part of campus as sort of an arts area. And there was a discussion that could become a new use that supports that. So how could we reconfigure that corner to be less pavement that accommodates fire trucks and more space for pedestrians? So we showed several concepts to the community and got their feedback, and this was ultimately the preferred concept. And I'll walk through this briefly and then show some illustrations of it, what it could look like. So the light blue is the YMCA. You can see Maple, Duck is on the right-hand side. West comes down the middle, and then Knobloch, and then University Avenue. Stillwater, the fire station at the corner of campus, is here on the west side. The pink would be what's we're proposing as mixed use, so it might have a first floor commercial space with 3 or 4 stories above that of residential. And then the brown would just be more student apartments, student housing, or just market rate housing. All of those mixed-use buildings, we're proposing that they have a structured parking element associated with them, so that we're not building a lot of surface parking to support this. We want to encourage more density and less surface parking in the area to the greatest extent we can. And then you see these 2 green spaces in the middle. That's in response to providing some sort of gathering area. Throwing in a little retail spot that I'll show you here in a minute what that could be, that could front onto that green space. And then also talking about extension of University Avenue from Knobloch over to Duck, and really creating that as more of a pedestrian corridor, more of a space for people. Cars, emergency vehicles can still get through there, but we want to make it a pedestrian zone as the first option. And then you can see that corner, how it could be redesigned, the roadway itself at University and Knobloch. It's a very wide asphalt corner now, so we can clean that up and make it less asphalt and more sidewalk and gallery space, maybe a plaza space outside the fire station, something like that. West Street would continue north through the development, but we think there's an opportunity that it could be designed in a way that it's you drive up onto a road table that would bring you up to the grade of the plaza space and the green space, and then that could just be closed off with bollards to make it a total pedestrian zone. So this is a view of that. We've got a few views I'll go through here fairly quickly, but looking to the northeast, so you can see the fire station there in the foreground, hotel convention center site up here in the background. So you can see how these mixed-use buildings with some commercial first floor, 3 stories of residential above, the green space in the middle, student apartments here on the southeast corner of the site, and then the expanded or rebuilt YMCA, finding a home there as well. And then you can see how the off-street or the active transportation facilities connect into and around that development site as well. And then here's a view looking to the southeast. So you're hovering over campus, looking back. Again, you see the mixed-use buildings here in the foreground. You can see how University would come in, and then you get a glimpse of this pedestrian promenade that would extend University Avenue over to Duck. On-street parking around all of this, and then these white, structured parking in between. We don't have a parking count on the structures at this point. This is very high level, but essentially those structures would have to be designed to hold the capacity of the residential units and any additional public parking that the city may want to negotiate into a deal for supporting parking in the area if that's necessary. Here we're getting closer down to ground level, looking to the east, looking through if you extend pedestrian way east on University Avenue. So you can see how that can start to feel as more of a pedestrian corridor. You could still have some shops that front onto the corner of West, as well as here on the corner of Knobloch and University. And then the green space within, so might just be a place to hang out, most days. You can see it connecting to this pedestrian zone on University. And then on West Street, so north would be to your right on this image, but you can see how, you could remove bollards so that vehicles can get through on University if needed. And then you can actually even close off West if you want to connect all of this as one space on, say, a game day or something. You could close both ends of West Street off and make this one contiguous space for a pregame, postgame event or some other festival or holiday activity that might occur here or back to school, things like that. So it just becomes a much more attractive. Flexibility is key, not over programming it or over designing it, but allowing multiple things to occur. Another thing with this solution is if you did block off West, you've still got access to shops and parking from both the north and south ends. So you're not really affecting functionality negatively. As I mentioned, we had EPS take a quick sort of snapshot pro forma look at this project. And really the key things I tried to bold here are, it's going to develop incrementally. It's not going to be an overnight thing. This may be a 10-year rollout. It just kind of depends on the market. Residential apartment buildings are feasible for student market. One of the things that they noted is that, a lot of the apartments around here are rented out by the bed, not on a per unit basis, which helps because that drives up the per unit rate that you can get. So it's a little bit elevated above standard market rate, which is good. And you're probably going to need to go up to that 4th story or 3 stories of residential above retail to really pay for structured parking to get that unit count up. And that still falls within your form-based code requirements in that area as well. And the comment they made was that standard apartment rates in Stillwater would not support structured parking, but that's where if you're doing it on a per bed rate and you can elevate that unit rate based on that helps you get to that point where you're netting out the ability to cover the parking. The mixed use buildings, so those 2 pink buildings, it's important that those are really fronting onto streets and they're not fronting onto just the green space or pedestrian, which is anybody that tries to lease that space would tell you that. And really, we're not looking at a lot of commercial space on those, just really sort of being strategic with where you place it. There's not a huge demand probably, but if we can come up with some service retail, some entertainment options, alternatives to just bars, you can still have that, but are there other things, e-lounges, e-sports lounges, things like that students can take advantage of. The one thing they also mentioned was that if you're not wanting to move forward with all apartments, that these roads could even be fronted with townhomes. You could wrap the structured parking with townhomes along there, so you could bring that scale down if that was desired. It just may be a little bit tougher to get your unit count up, but there's some flexibility in the product that somebody might put out there. And then that building that's tucked back in, that building C that's tucked back in on the green space, the concept there is that could be a food hall type space. Can garner some higher rents, which is good, and is a really good companion piece for that green space. It can open out onto that. You can have the ability to carry, consumption out into that space and things like that. So it really creates for a good accessory to that green space. And the other part of that is the green space, the corridors, the streetscape improvements. Those are really what they can catalyze that private investment. If the city comes forward, the city, university, however you do that, structure some sort of partnership to show that this is important, work with a developer and do a true partnership. Those can be a real catalyst because those become prime opportunities that people want to live adjacent to those and be in that walkable environment. Moving on to the Monroe Gateway, I mentioned goal number 1 there, improve the front door to campus. So we look at an opportunity to introduce some new mixed-use development there as well, add some more density, add some more commercial opportunity along 6th Avenue, clean up and simplify some of the vehicular movements, and expand the green space there. We're really looking at, and you'll see here in a minute, from Washington all the way to Monroe, and then improve the aesthetics of the area. So Monroe is here on the left edge, and then Washington Street is on the right, the strip. So one of the key things we look at is disconnecting Jefferson from 6th Avenue. So improving the pedestrian and simplifying the vehicular movements on 6th Avenue between Washington and Monroe. So again, we're maintaining the access into the gas station. Right now, if you remember, there's a green space, an undeveloped lot there on the northeast corner that has a drive that comes into, I think it's a Valero station. So we've got to be mindful of that and still provide some easy access if this is going to be realistic. So we're accommodating and still having that access directly off of 6th there. But looking at something that would be more of a commercial mixed-use type space on the corner to define that edge. I mentioned this Gateway Plaza opportunity on the northwest corner. And then looking at a potential redevelopment and putting in new buildings here between Washington and Jefferson to add some additional residential density to the area along the strip, as well as some other commercial opportunities. And then just looking at some additional pad site type retail that could occur on the southeast corner that is somewhat complementary to the Sprouts. So it's more of a suburban type product, but we think extending that over to Monroe could make some sense in the future. It could be retail, could be office, something like that. And then Washington Park, the green space that's there today, one of the benefits of additional benefits of disconnecting Jefferson is that you can create this nice linear green space all along that edge. So that can become this, in addition to a gateway here at the corner of Monroe, you can really create a nice green edge that can become a front door or a front lawn to campus, whether you're coming up through the strip or coming along to Monroe. And you can announce, campus there if you want, or just announce you're kind of in the downtown portion of Stillwater. So what does that look like? Here's a view looking to the northeast. Monroe is going just diagonally across, and then 6th Avenue up off to the right. So you can see this little Gateway Plaza here. It could be some sort of sculptural element or maybe more of a sign or something. We think the corner here is probably just a one-story on all two corners here, these 3 buildings. Probably not a market there for anything larger than that, but that's kind of hedging on the conservative side here. And then you can see the gas station is left intact there, and then you can see this new, again, first floor commercial with some 3rd-story or 3-story retail or residential above. If Jefferson, we think that these slots along Jefferson, they could be retail if the market's there, but really they might just be some walkout residential units onto that street or something that's convertible or adaptable. And then you can see that linear green along 6th Avenue that could be developed. And then you see the purple arrows that signify what's happening with the pedestrian and bike facilities. Another look at that, hovering kind of above the Washington Street intersection, looking to the northwest, creating some sort of gateway element here on the corner as you enter Washington Street. And I'll talk about Washington Street in a little bit, and we're proposing a concept that might convert that to one-way, so you can see how that road gets narrowed down, and I'll have more on that in a minute. And then 6th Place, rather than coming from Jefferson straight out to 6th Avenue, creating a connection along 6th Place and having some on-street parking for the shops that would front onto that. And then down closer to street level, looking at this gateway corner. Again, this is just something generic, but it could be, some sort of iconic little park space or some other sort of sculpture or architectural identity element that could occur there. So their snapshot pro forma, they think there is real potential there. It's an important corner. There's a lot of visibility at that corner for people coming to campus and just passing through on 6th. They're identifying commercial rents at around $30 full service. And then that all 3 sites for the 6th and Monroe corner would really, look at a 4 space per 1,000 parking. So something more conventional to what you'd see typically today. But then building B at the corner between Jefferson and Washington, looking at that as a mixed use with 1 level of commercial, 3 levels of apartments, and then that the commercial space should probably be limited to 6th Avenue. And that's where I mentioned the one fronting on the Jefferson probably wants to be more maybe walkout, or perhaps it's just some parking at that level. But we do think if you wanted to stretch that along Washington makes some sense as well, because it's already considered a commercial corridor. So we do think there's an opportunity to wrap, but you can kind of get a visual of what that could potentially do to that corner and make it a much more visible entry point. Again, it's through the strip, but up into campus. And then the last area of consideration is Washington Street itself and the strip. And so really the goal is to maximize pedestrian and bicycle space while balancing the need for parking and vehicular circulation. So we look at an option to convert Washington to one-way north. We presented some alternatives, and the community's preference was this one-way north option. We're looking at one side going to parallel, and then redesigning 4th Avenue and Washington Street intersection to prioritize bicycle and pedestrian movements, and then ultimately introducing a cohesive streetscape character and urban design elements to really reinforce that cohesive identity. And then enhancing the visitor experience and the image of the strip. There's something really nice about that eclectic nature of the variety, diversity of the buildings. That's fine, but we can do something maybe that ties it all together in the urban realm with the streetscape. Capitalize on expanded pedestrian space, the brand and identity, I mentioned that. And then item number 4, one of the things that we really is important for us, if we're talking about new urban design and new streetscape elements and doing something that would be above what might be typical standard, it's important for us to make sure that you all are planning ahead for the maintenance and the long-term maintenance and understanding that there is a price to have those nice things, as they say. And so it's important that as you look at those improvements, you're also looking at, okay, how are we going to pay for this? Who's going to maintain it? Is it the city? Is there a improvement district or some other business district that could be partnering to help maintain things like that? So it's important to have those conversations before you try to turn on the new lights. So the plan concept here, north is to the right, so the university is on the left side of the screen, and then 6th Avenue would be just off the right edge of the screen. So in this concept, you can see we're converting Washington Street north, one-way northbound, all the way from 6th Place up to University. On the southern half, if you will, the southern block, angled parking would be on the west or left-hand side, which is where we've got a significant number of businesses along there, as well as if we're looking at redeveloping that corner that adds even more business potential along there. Maintain parallel parking on the east side. And then when we go through 4th Avenue, we offset that. So we're doing a couple of things there. We're putting the majority of the parking where we've got more businesses, more storefronts, but we're also putting a little bit of a bend in the road to help slow traffic. Again, doing whatever we can to sort of be tactile about how we're reducing traffic volume and speed on the street, and then maintaining parallel parking on the west side of the street once you get north of 4th. And then that area in 4th, I'll show you here in some images about how we're creating that as more of a pedestrian plaza, and then demarcating roadway edges with pavement markings, bollards, streetscape elements, things like that. So this would be a view looking to the north. This is existing 4th Street intersection roughly today, pretty basic. And you can see the parking, currently angled parking both sides, two-way street. So when we convert that to one-way, you can see the idea would be that we would have this up on a road table. So you would ramp up to curb height. All of this would be essentially one elevation. And then you would ramp back down when you get on the north edge. Special paving, some sort of special treatment through here to, again, make it feel like a pedestrian space that just happens to have a place for cars to move through north, south, east, and west. You can see angled parking on the west side of the street, parallel parking on the north. This gives you more space, expanded sidewalk space by doing this because we've dropped a lane of traffic and we've gone from parallel or angled parking on both sides to parallel on one side. So we're able to give some of that asphalt space back to sidewalk, cafe seating, pedestrian space, and enhancing the experience for pedestrians. And then you can lightly see on here we're carrying bicycle markings through that intersection because 4th Avenue would be a bike route. So we're making sure people know that this is an important bike route when they cross through the intersection. Here's something more down at eye level, again, existing. And then you can see the evolution of that if you start creating more space for street trees. We don't have all of the streetscape amenities included in these right now. But just narrowing that road down, it's still passable for emergency vehicles. You've got you're not diminishing the safety factor there. Deliveries, that can be coordinated with businesses if we need to provide some part of that as loading zone, certain times a day, things like that. Those can be accommodated. But really the key here is going from, in some places, a 6-foot wide sidewalk to 12 or 11 at least, and just giving more space for pedestrians. And then another view here looking to the north. And you can see how that intersection transforms and becomes more of a plaza. And really, weekends like this weekend, I don't know that it's been done in the past, but to me, that's the time when you block off the entire street anyway. Typically, you would want to do that just to make this all a festival zone. Doesn't mean you have to, but if nothing else, maybe you block off the 4th Street intersection or from 4th Street north to campus or something like that. But this could be the beginning of that. Again, demarcating that this space is for pedestrians as the priority. And then a couple of sections of what that looks like. So here's the existing section. This is north of 4th Avenue, looking to the north towards campus. Today, existing 10-foot lanes. You've got about 12 feet of parking on both sides for the angled parking, and then about 8 feet of sidewalk on one, 6 feet of sidewalk on the other with those amenities in that space. If we do that conversion, you've dropped that roadway down to one 12-foot lane plus curb and gutter. You've got some room for landscaping at those islands at the intersection. You've got the angled parking on one side, parallel parking would be in this 10-foot zone on the other side. You've got 9.5 feet here, but this is showing you where there would be a tree grate, but between trees you've got 9.5 feet, so you've got more room for the potential for cafe seating here. Some folks like to put their cafe seating out in the amenity zone, just kind of depends on how that's managed. And then you've got, up to 12 feet on the other side. And this is still conceptual. Some of this could even be, reduce the width of this parking area to a certain extent if you want to grab more pedestrian zone, but at least it gives you an idea of the possibility. One of the key things out of that is through that study, one of the things we learned, we actually, and this was a bit of a surprise to us, we can actually gain about a half dozen parking spaces through that conversion. Normally you'd think, okay, half of these are going to go parallel, we're going to lose parking, but if we get more efficient, and ultimately it's in the final design, that'll determine where you really land. It could be more. And it kind of depends. There are some parts of the street that currently don't have parking on it, but we're accommodating some angled or parallel parking there. Up by the Greek houses, you've got some parking areas that don't have any on-street parking, so there might be an opportunity to redesign that edge. But if you really kind of look at the whole street, there's an opportunity to pull this off and actually add a few more parking spaces, which, again, as I said, was a bit of a surprise to us, but it's a good, a net benefit, we think. And then land use. This will be pretty quick. So goal number 1, focus and prioritize on higher density development around the campus and other major activity areas. So really, if we're going to have higher density, make it around campus and not so much by the neighborhoods. That's a way to protect those neighborhoods. Rezone potential development, redevelopment parcels to be consistent with the proposed land use map. That's how you begin to implement this. And then also preserving the Westwood neighborhood and other existing single-family neighborhoods within the district. So being mindful that we don't want the campus student housing to continue to creep. So we'll look at where we can sort of fend that off, put in some transitional type use. Another thing we'll talk about is the ability to, or the need to protect those existing single-family lots along 6th Avenue where we have a lot of driveways that come out onto the corridor, and what do we do with those as those begin to potentially transition to other uses in the future, and I'll talk about that. So I won't go through all of this, but some of the places where some revisions are being proposed to your existing land use plan are a transition block here on the eastern edge of the Westwood neighborhood. Again, providing something that's sort of a medium density residential and putting that as kind of that edge. That's the edge of the neighborhood. That's sort of where we're saying this is as far as we're going to want the redeveloped student housing to grow. And then also along 6th Avenue, looking at redevelopment block. So we'll talk about that here in just a second, but really being mindful that we want to be cautious about allowing those single lots to just continue to redevelop as a single lot in perpetuity, but being a little more strategic about that. And here's what I'm talking about. So over at 6th and Western, we've got all of these lots that have driveways right on the 6th, and there's some more on the east side of Westwood Elementary School as well. And they're a problem from a traffic safety standpoint. They're a problem from pedestrian and bicycle safety if we're trying to extend facilities along there at all. But those are going to continue to change in use, and we want to be mindful that they don't evolve. And what we see in a lot of communities is those begin to evolve into non-conforming type uses when it's no longer profitable to be a home or even a rental for students. So what we did is we developed a concept that said, hey, what if we get proactive and look at a redevelopment scenario there and say, one of the things we want to do is we want to encourage development on a block level and not a lot level. So providing, and this will come up in implementation, but providing some design standard updates that require these to be developed in a way that you can't just come in and tear a home down and build something else on a single lot, but you're going to have to do it on a block level. And it doesn't have to be what we're showing here. This was envisioned as just some walk-up townhomes that are rear-loaded, but it brings the drives off of 6th, coming in off Ridge, rear access parking or rear access garages, some guest parking, and then those have just walkouts onto the front. What we don't show on here, this actually, with the ODOT project, the western end, probably about the length of the first building and a half, is going to be widened, adding another lane and sidewalk and retaining wall. This still functions just fine. It's just something we have to update on this diagram to be aligned with what ODOT's showing. But the idea here is we're trying to protect, again, this edge of this quality neighborhood and not let that edge deteriorate and get in front of it. And then the last focus area, urban design, and this will be relatively quick as well. So creating a cohesive streetscape environment through the study area. So that doesn't just mean on 6th Avenue, it means throughout the neighborhood or throughout the district, downtown, around campus, in these redevelopment zones. So that was key. And so we looked at some opportunities of what that imagery could be, what that urban design sort of framework could be. Another key goal was develop and implement open, green, and urban public realm spaces. So talking about that green space at Campus Corner, even looking for opportunities for green space downtown, and then little areas that we can take advantage of that are already there, expanding between Washington and Monroe, and that sort of leveraging that green space. And then incorporating sustainable design and stormwater best management practices into these. So that's a part of the infrastructure improvements as well, and that vocabulary needs to be accounted for in these projects, whether it's stormwater or even, you know, the type of lighting we're selecting and the plant choices that we're making. So we're using water hardy plants and things like that. So the urban design approach, we presented 3 different sort of inspiration boards, if you will, or idea boards to the community. And overwhelmingly, this is what they chose, was something we termed it this indigenous inspired theme. And I think the key things here are it's native materials. It's, you know, we're taking advantage of sort of the imagery of the geomorphology of the area, the layers of the topography, the landscape, you know, something that's a little bit, I don't know if I'd say historic, but it's of the area. So that's where that indigenous term comes in. But we're really trying to express the natural elements and the landscape of the region through and into the streetscape. So that's where the photographs are just some, again, they're sort of inspiration images of how we translate those words and that theme into tactile materials. And this is not a final design. This is what we've developed as a first sort of take on how we would interpret that into urban design elements and what we call a kit of parts. And it is really just that, it's a kit of parts. It's not saying that all of these things would be introduced everywhere throughout the corridor, but it's sort of the toolbox that you can pull out of that says, hey, here we want to do an important street. We think these things are appropriate to use here. This gateway marker might be appropriate, you know, along the highway or in a large area, but this neighborhood marker might be here, things like that. So really you can see we're using, you know, sort of subdued natural tones, earthy tones, kind of playing up the concept of the flow of water, and then the layering of the geomorphology. The color, it's blue because it reads well. Quite honestly, it could be anything. We could have made it orange, but we decided to do something different on this one. And then, you know, there's nothing magic about any of the graphics on the banners or any of these light pole treatments, but it's this notion that you have a family of things that work together well, and then you can use them in different ways so that as you move throughout the area, there's consistency and there's this sense that you know you're in the place when you arrive. So what a typical street section might look like if it was a 4-lane, you know, we're not really applying a lot of this to 6th Avenue because there's not a lot of room. At most, there might be some things we could do with some of the lighting, street lighting, and maybe some of these things can be introduced at the intersections. But you can see where you can provide seating, pedestrian lighting, and how they can all work together to sort of create a theme and a sense of place when you arrive at this point in the corridor. And then how do we apply these? We look at street typologies. So the blue or the green would be what we're calling primary streetscape typology. Blue would be secondary, and yellow would be tertiary. So what does that mean? So a primary street is something it's a high traffic, high visibility, it's an important district. So that's where you see that downtown on Main Street and just off Main Street in the business district. You also see it on Washington Street. You see it up along Maple if we're looking at redeveloping that, whether it's the Campus Corner concept or we're looking at the Convention Center project. And then we've also got a little bit that's a little tough to see along University Avenue at that corner. The purple dots are also along that edge. We think there's sort of this University Avenue blend or university blend that could mix in with this kit of parts. So it's all about kind of designing it in a way that functions and works well together. Secondary, it's similar tools from the toolbox, if you will, but we're maybe using fewer of them. And then tertiary, again, maybe it's just street trees, or maybe it's street trees and similar light fixtures. But the idea is that when you're in this area, you feel like it's all one consistent place and you know where you're at. One of the things we've talked about that will be added to this is we're going to continue to expand that typology west of downtown into these neighborhoods a little bit further, at least out to Monroe. But really what we're talking about is that in our minds, this is kind of the core sort of campus downtown portion of the corridor. Probably not critical that we extend this the entire length of all the neighborhoods along 6th Avenue. And then finally, I'll touch on these gateway opportunities. So over on the east by at Perkins and and 6th Avenue. There might be an opportunity there for the westbound traffic that's entering town to announce that you've arrived in Stillwater, even though you're already here. It's an important kind of zone. And similarly, we think the gateway at Monroe is an important demarcation line as well. And something even out at Western we think makes some sense, but that's, I think, yet to be determined. And then we see these secondary gateway opportunities where you might have something smaller, but those really talk about what's north and south. They're more of a neighborhood-oriented type gateway. And then, the other thing we thought is when you're coming in from the north on Main Street, it's interesting that when you get to 4th, you really start to feel like you're in a downtown area. The structures start to feel a little bit more like what's south of 6th. So we think let's extend downtown up there so that we start to pull that area into the downtown fabric a little more. And then at 3rd, that becomes an important connection into the neighborhood as well. And so you can see what, if you started to introduce some of those streetscape elements at the Monroe Gateway, what that could potentially look like. And then we even said, okay, what if you don't have a new building here on the corner? Maybe there's more of a park space or a green space that's developed there. So again, it's just thinking about options of what could be. And then finally, and I'll wrap up here and answer questions. So implementation, we're just really beginning to lay this out. You can see there's a lot on how the active transportation network needs to be implemented over time. We worked with staff and kind of talked through, at least at this point, a 5-phase approach. And the important thing to point out here, phase A, the first phase really is about relieving pressure from 6th Avenue during the construction project. So putting that in place for those pedestrian bicycle improvements beforehand, and so that people have and know there's another route and alternative. And so those are in place before we have all the additional vehicular traffic on those streets. And then really that phase A builds out the core framework for the rest of the network. Rather than building from the outer edges and not having them connected, we want to build from the middle out. So we're adding on to it, so we're always sort of building that connected facility and network as we move forward. And then the redevelopment opportunities, really it's be flexible, I think is a key term here. It's going to take the city determining how active you might want to be in that process or not be. Do you get into land banking, land acquisition? Do you let it all be market driven? How reactive or proactive do you want to be? What can you do to incentivize that from a funding standpoint? I mentioned the infrastructure, green space. What commitment can the city make that might help leverage some additional private equity and investment? And then, leveraging all the tools you've got for funding. Sales tax incentives, TIF, you guys are familiar with these. Is there a new bid potentially over in that area? What can you do with CDBG funds and so forth? But I think the key thing here from a decision maker standpoint is committing to a vision and then sticking to that. We've seen communities where they come out with a lot of energy. Things don't happen in the first year, 2, 3 years. And then somebody comes along with something and they get desperate. And they go ahead and move forward with something and they take that short-term win. But they've really compromised the long-term vision. And so they've sort of opened the floodgates for more of those types of short-term wins. So we really try to coach people on, you got to be committed because you're going to have to potentially pass on some things that might otherwise look good. So it's important to have that. And as a group, talk amongst yourselves, talk with staff, and make sure everyone understands, is this best for us or not? And sometimes that short-term win is an important win. From a land use standpoint, adopt the future land use plan, adopt the corridor plan as a supplement to the comp plan. That's one of the first things to do, so that you can ensure that your future development, redevelopment is consistent with this plan. Without teeth, it really, there's nothing you can do, other than try. I mentioned requiring redevelopment at a larger block level. I don't think that just applies to that area between on 6th Avenue over by Western. I think that's something to look at in a lot of these other neighborhoods, is being mindful the character you want, and being cautious about letting lot level type redevelopment continue. And then that also goes into what your design standards are reflecting in terms of parking and things like that. And then finally, urban design. Start to incorporate the kit of parts in your street projects. Do whatever you can to leverage existing or upcoming projects as your opportunity to do a demonstration of how this can begin to look. Maybe there's a demonstration block opportunity. One of the things we want to be cautious about is we tell people it's pretty scientific, but we say you don't want your first project to be a won't because you've lost all that momentum that you've generated. So whatever you do it well the first time, and that doesn't necessarily mean put a lot of stuff all over the place. It could just be put the right stuff in the right place. Use this to prioritize your capital improvement plan moving forward. Partnerships, is it always the city paying for it? What can you do from a developer standpoint to leverage some of those funds? Working with ODOT, coordinating with the university so that you're beginning to implement that urban design kit. And then again, be creative, utilize and leverage and turn over every rock you can to find funding. And then just, that reminder that these are the types of improvements that can really catalyze, even these conversations can begin the buzz, but then when you start to put stuff in the ground, you can catalyze those private reinvestment opportunities. And then also be prepared to have a conversation about who's going to pay the electric bill, who's going to pay for the maintenance, who's going to do the maintenance. So those are those important conversations as well. So finally, the next steps, we're wrapping up this document, and then we will be delivering it, and it'll come back to the Planning Commission in December, and then back to this body December 20th for your review and hopefully approval. So with that, happy to answer questions or try to answer any questions you might have.
That is a ton of information, Terry. We appreciate you being here to present it. I'm sure the council has many questions or discussion points, so I'll open it up for comments or questions from the council. Who wants to go first? Go ahead, Councilor Gillespie.
Okay. Thank you, Terry, for that wonderful presentation. I just want to remind, and maybe you can give us a little bit of more of a reminder of the public involvement process that went into this work. I think it's so important when we see the starts of plans like this that we understand what part the community played and what part the stakeholders played. I see a lot of our community members out in the audience tonight, and I know this is taking place in spaces where they work and have businesses. So
as I mentioned, when we first started, we went, I think we had a list of about I'm going to say a dozen, probably shouldn't throw that number out, but about a dozen stakeholders that we reached out to and either had phone or at the time Zoom interviews. Some of them we actually met in person here on the ground. And so we interviewed them and just asked some basic questions, let them know what we were doing, and asked basic questions about what are the concerns you have, what can we do to help, how can this project help. So we met with them. And then at that same time, we held our first public meeting over in the community center, had 95 people attend, which was awesome. We had a great turnout, had a lot of good conversations in the gymnasium over there. Had a lot of folks standing around afterward, and that's usually a good sign that, one, people are engaged and interested, and then when they hang around and we can't get out of there, that's always a good sign because they're excited, but that also is helpful for us because a lot of times we learn more from the post-meeting conversations than we do during a meeting. So that was great. The information from that meeting was also posted and from all of our advisory committee meetings that we held throughout the process were posted online. We didn't get a ton of feedback from the online engagement like we had hoped, but we had good input from advisory committee members. We met with them a handful of times over the course of the project. We came back to have a follow-up public meeting and shared the ideas based on the input. At that one, we had about 25 or 30 attendees, which wasn't as many as we had hoped, But we all felt like after the meeting, again, we had very good input and conversations, and we probably wouldn't have gotten a lot of different input if we had had 50 or 100 people. The folks we got were probably the most vocal folks the first time around, so that was good. So we felt good about the input and that we could move forward based on that. And then along the way, we were, reviewing and checking with advisory committee and with staff and getting their feedback. So, and then public planning commission, public hearing, we presented the information there as well, and then tonight.
Thank you. Did we have, as a community, this is a little out of the box for us. We haven't done this kind of active transportation planning. We haven't done a real corridor plan like this, I don't think, in a while. Was there anything within those conversations with our community that surprised you or was atypical? I know you guys obviously do a lot of this all over the country. Is there?
No, not really. Every community is different, and they all have unique issues. I don't know that there was anything that came up that I don't know that anything was a surprise, or there are things you're like, oh, I hadn't thought of that. Yes, those happen all the time, which is why we have those conversations. But there wasn't anything that occurred that made us have to completely revamp what we were doing or retool, luckily, because we've had those before as well, and that's not fun. But I think that goes to the fact that we were checking in with advisory committee and staff on a pretty regular basis. And after we do the public meetings and we have those, we always do a debrief with staff. Okay, here's what we heard. Now tell us what the real story might be. And it was, there weren't a ton of those sort of hidden agendas. We just didn't run into that.
Yeah, I think sometimes when we bring stuff out to the public, there's a lot of chatter about, who from the public is participating. Obviously, you have groups that are very vocal about active transportation, maybe groups that are very vocal against active transportation. Did we find the people in the middle, the people in our community that might use these facilities and the businesses that would be interacting around these facilities? Did you feel like we had good participation at that level? Yeah,
so, and especially at the first meeting, and the way that meeting was facilitated, we broke into 3 small subgroups after, the 90-some people, we divided up into groups. And I worked specifically with the topic of active transportation. And so we had folks that were just residents that live in neighborhoods that want to ride their bikes or walk their kids to school. We had people that actually ride their bikes and commute to work. And then we had people that just, are recreational cyclists. And then we had people that, as you normally do, that, you talk about, well, we really want to make sure that we're rating the comfort level of bicyclists. Well, what about the comfort level of car drivers? So we had those folks in the crowd as well, and we just have to balance that input. And so, I think that's why you don't have a plan here where we're showing dedicated bike lanes everywhere you go. I mean, it's a plan that I think fits the neighborhoods and fits what we heard and what makes sense for the campus and the neighborhoods around as well.
That is something I really appreciated in the plan, that it wasn't just one big drastic step into those multimodal facilities. It really did seem to align with how we as a community might use these facilities, how we're using the ones that we have now, and how we could enhance the use of those types of facilities in our community as we develop them further. I think one of the other things I really appreciated about your presentation today was, and we talked about this actually when we met recently with the consultants for our form-based code area, and they talked a lot about our investment as a city in these infrastructure, in these kind of public spaces, and how that investment promotes and catalyzes private investment. So right. I think one of the things that they said that really stuck with me in that meeting was, building streets that are worthy of the buildings that we want people to develop in our community, and building, sidewalks and paths that are worthy of that type of investment. I think that's something that's very important here, and important for us to consider as we look at implementation and things like that. If we want these people to come, if we want people that are in our community to continue to invest in our community, we have to be able to invest in
Right.
ourselves in these public realms. So one of the things I'm most interested in as a planner is the implementation piece. We get a bad rap sometimes for coming up with really impressive plans and not always coming up with implementation strategies. I'll be really interested to see that further fleshed out in the plan that comes out to us, just to make sure that we are looking at, I know you mentioned, funding for maintenance and things like that. That's something I've heard from our community as well, making sure we're maintaining the facilities that we build, but also I think looking for funding and how we phase these things in a way that's truly something we can implement, as opposed to something that sits on the shelf and something that we, had a flash in the pan idea and it doesn't, nothing ever comes of it. So I'm very interested in that.
So when we talk about implementation in the document, one of the things that will be in there that is still being developed is we work with staff and with the community to identify projects, if you will, that can be built together or should go together, as opposed to just listing project 1 through 10 and we think this is a 3-year, 5-year, 10-year priority or whatever, because life doesn't happen linear. And so it's more important that we look at, okay, if this thing comes along, this is a project that could go together. These 3 things should be done together. If you do one of them without the others, you're going to end up with that sort of lack of energy. So what we'll be talking about is how to sort of be flexible, but with a plan, if you will. And that's been the most successful for the communities we've worked in, is we give them the parts and pieces so they can kind of grab the best, and then layering in there, okay, who's responsible for this? Who oversees this? And then talking, how do you fund these, or what's private, what's public, and so forth.
For some of the areas where there would be kind of a marked change in traffic flow or pedestrian flow, will you have recommendations for how we roll that out to the community in terms of education or?
So we don't necessarily go into the what or the how, really, I guess. We don't go into the how, but we'll mention the what. Like this would take, like I mentioned on 7th Street, part of that recommendation is, or part of the action item within that would be, developing a communication strategy for X project, or because some of those are, it's a change in culture, and that's really what you're talking about. It's not bad, it's just, it's a different thing. And so we want to make sure that for some of those, it has a communication piece attached, so you don't leapfrog that and then try to apply it after the fact when people have already gotten frustrated because you've changed something without them knowing how to
I don't know
use it.
when we put the roundabout in downtown, but we still hear about the roundabout. I think it's just a challenging. But it's a challenge,
yes.
right? It's a traffic calming.
Yeah. But
piece
it's
that people are
communication is key.
accustomed to. I'm sure I have more, but
Let's go ahead.
please jump in.
You're actually taking care of some of the ones that I had.
Vice Mayor?
It's a lot of information, and I loved bits and pieces of all of it, and I think I'm like Councilor Jaloski. I want to make sure implementation is key. We have a few key things in my mind in this area between Campus Corner and Monroe, one being a potential conference convention center, one being the McKnight Center, and being mindful of development that happens in that area. In my opinion, we have already a lot of student housing, and so how do we deal with what we currently have and create more of a mixed-use opportunity and some different maybe types of housing to look at that. And so I think, to me, that's, I just want to be mindful of that, because I know that you say a 4-story apartment building, and in my mind, the public's just going to be like, no, we have enough of those. So being mindful on communicating exactly what it is that we want to do in that area. And then making sure that the McKnight Center and the Conference Center, I want people to come in and stay and eat and spend time and not just come in and do the events and then leave. And so being mindful of creating those spaces that are, yes, for students, but then also for businesses. I love the idea of the Washington corridor area. I've always thought that would be a great, I think that has a great potential for it. And I also love the Monroe Gateway. I love that opportunity also. Great. Just kind of another entrance into into campus, and then also just that intersection and corner has just had some challenges, and I think we need to address that as a community and figure out, as we redo the 6th Street corridor, what that needs to look like so that everyone's safe, no matter what form of transportation you use. So it's a lot of information, and I'm sure I'm going to have a lot of questions for Monty. I'll come see him, but I think I just want to make sure that we're implementing it the right way, and that we are really communicating to the public exactly what the purpose is of what we're doing and why we're doing it. So.
Right. Okay, thank you.
I would agree. There's great information, ensuring that we're doing what the community wants. I think will be important. I think there's all sorts of things we could do in this, and so prioritizing will be an important piece. I had one question, and this is such a weird detail question. I seem to always ask those, but the advisory lane, you talked about the husband to Main on 7th Street advisory lane, and that, I mean, that's a fairly busy little street. And as I look at that, I understand the concept, but I also worry that where the bikers are, cars backing out diagonally,
Right.
could wing a biker pretty easily.
So
I was just going to ask, how have communities incorporated these where it is safe? I
Right.
love the concept, but I also have been hit by a car on a bike, so it does seem like it would be easy for that to happen.
So we had several conversations specifically about that and how to work through that. And with our transportation planner as well, and trying to figure out the best sort of compromise, if you will. And because it's an important route for bicycles, especially when you've got the bike shop right there. And that is, to me, it's a great street for downtown. You've got the bike shop, you've got, the wine shop, there's so much potential for that. And so it's where bikes are going to want to be, and probably already are. So the design, and again, this isn't final design, but the concept shows that the advisory lanes are pulled away from the parking spaces. They're not right at the back end of the parking spaces, specifically for that, so that there's room for the bicyclists to react if they see a car. Because I cycle as well, and one of the scariest things for me is a bike lane that's going right by parallel cars, because I just know somebody's going to open their car door and I'm going to catch it. And that happens a lot. Well, you don't always have room to shift that lane over, and that's what we're doing here. And that's part of the reason it's an advisory lane. So the first option was just do it as a share row and let it be marked, and just be aware that you're going to share the road with bikes. But we thought, let's put the striping in the road to make it even more of a clear indicator for cars traveling east and west that this is a bike route. And again, it's communication, and I do think it's likely one that it's worth maybe doing some temporary demonstration to test it. Mark it with some temporary markings for a month or couple months during season when it's nice enough to be out riding, and monitor it and see how it works.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have a lot to add aside to say that I think people have heard me sit up here and talk a lot about active modes of transportation and what a proponent of them I am. As a stroke doctor, I think people need to ride bikes more and walk more. I appreciated the fact that we didn't just go carte blanche and put a bunch of bike lanes on every street in the corridor and in the study area. So I think that it's important for people like me to keep in mind that this is what is best for our community. Mm-hmm. If it were up to me, we'd have bike lanes on every street in the city, because I don't like to see people in the hospital that have had strokes. So it's appreciated that you've taken such an active approach to this in trying to get public input on this. I think that as we move forward, even beyond this conceptual framework, to keep that in mind, even as we're going into implementation phases, is to keep those lines of communication open.
Yeah.
Because we have a lot of people in the city that have a lot of differing views, and so this is going to be a compromise. I think it's important to keep in mind that at this stage in it, this is a concept, right? Mm-hmm. This is not by any means how it's going to look at the end of all of this, But at the very least, this provides us a good vision of what it could be. And this is an excellent start. And if we could have it end up looking exactly like this, I think that'd be awesome. But I think it's important for people to realize that as we go forward, as we start implementing some of these projects, to keep an open mind and hear everybody out.
Yeah.
So it's reassuring that we've started off on that foot, and surely that will continue. One other thing that I think is important to realize here is that looking at this framework, at this concept, kind of going back to your concerns about the housing pieces in this, Stillwater is a unique community in that we have the benefit of a very large land-grant university right here in our city, and that is a benefit in many, many ways. One of the things that I hear a lot, and as somebody who is living in this neighborhood right now, next to the university, is this academic sprawl, or that idea of the university, kind of encroaching on single-family housing, especially in the Westwood neighborhood district. And so by looking at things like this and having concepts not only of mixed use, because mixed use is going to be important in this, but having those pieces of how do we retain those established neighborhoods that are there, and that's implemented in this very nicely as well. So there's a lot of exciting things in this that will certainly change as we go forward. But this, I think, is a great start into looking at what this could be someday.
Thank you.
Thanks, Terry.
Yeah, so along those lines, I guess my questions are going to be around what does this thing mean for the city? Because to me, there's a couple of one big major demarcation between a plan for our current public spaces, our right-of-way on streets, and how we use the right-of-way that we have, and configure bike lanes, and where we paint our lines. And then there's a big part of this plan that deals with what's currently private property, where businesses exist. I think if I was looking at some of the redevelopment opportunities and I was one of the landowners or business owners who had a current business in one of those places, I'd go, wait a second, where's my restaurant, or where's my office that's currently on that land? And so I guess my question on that front is, how should we approach this from a council perspective and a community discussion perspective? And if we're talking about this is a redevelopment opportunity, what does that mean? If we adopt a plan, we say this is something we think we might want to do eventually, or we're going to talk to you about this, or how does that?
So essentially what it is it's a vision. It just says, from a city standpoint, if something happens there in the future, here is a vision of what we would like that to be. It doesn't say we are going to go do this. It doesn't say we are going to acquire property and do it ourselves. But private development community, business owners, property owners, if at some point in time something happens, this is what our vision is at this point. 5 years from now, your vision might change, and that's part of why this is really, master plans are malleable. But at this point in time, this is a vision for what those areas could be. And that's really it. That's why, implementation around those redevelopment opportunities is more about forming partnerships, communicating with business and property owners about the future. What we find in communities is you find that a business owner is like, you know what, I've been wanting to figure out how to get out of this for 10 years. Is there a part I could play in this? Or I would love to replace my building, my facility, I just don't have the whereabouts. Maybe I could be a tenant in a new building. You just never know. And so it's just about conversations. It's not locking you into doing any of those things. It's a vision at this point.
Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense. I think I'd like to see some more clarity within the plan itself that kind of sets that apart from, what, this map of the active transportation plans for the corridor, which I think we as a city could say, listen, this is, this is something we can do, right? And we own all this. We can paint the lines that way. And a little bit more demarcation about if we do adopt this plan, what does that mean for what gets implemented and how it gets implemented?
Yeah, and in the actual summary document, these are just snapshots and slides to show you what's in the plan. It's a narrative document. It's got a lot more description of how things are applied, what this means. So yes, that's where that information is carried. So it's much more descriptive on what this means or how this should be implemented and so forth.
Because, yeah, like I said, I mean, the redevelopment around Campus Corner is certainly a vision that we've talked about and I've talked about with various people in the community, and certainly, you know, it's something that we would love to see, but I don't want people to say, oh, you adopted this plan, that means you're going to build this,
Right.
versus we adopted this plan and we are going to put a bike lane on 4th Street. You know, I mean, that those are kind of two different outcomes that come from adopting the plan, and we just I want to make sure we're clear on to the community which of these things we're saying, yes, this is happening, and which of these things is vision.
Yeah, and we'll be sure to work with staff and make sure we're articulating that well in that document. And then, you know, the other part of this is, I think it's on one of the slides that mentioned, so those infrastructure projects, the bike lanes, the streetscape, things like that, those you can begin to pull out of this document and figure out where they fit in your CIP.
Yeah.
So that's when those start to become more real. You know, you're not building anything out of this document. This is an information guiding document that you pull from to do other things. So, you know, the redevelopment, again, it's a guiding document for other things.
And that's an excellent point, and I'm glad you made it. And I think that's one of the things from a communication standpoint we want to make sure we're being clear about, because we have a lot of plans in this town. We've had a lot of plans that sit on shelves, and people like to pull them off and say, hey, look at this thing you guys adopted 20 years ago. Why doesn't it look like that now? And I think we need to be very communicative about what we're doing with this, which is not something that we want to pull off a shelf in 5 years and say, why isn't this building right here? And I think that process of, okay, taking it from a master plan and putting it into an implementation policy, you know, what's that look like? When would that happen? You know, that kind of communication with our community, I think, will be very helpful.
I think it's also important to zoom out for a second and recognize that, yes, this is an active transportation plan, but what ultimately we would be able to accomplish with a plan like this is, as you bring people out of their cars onto sidewalks, onto bicycles, into the neighborhood and out into the community, they're starting to interact with their neighbors, they're starting to interact with the businesses and the community at a more intimate level. And so ultimately we are placemaking with this plan. And so that vision, I think, is very important as a part of that process, because we are in fact placemaking as we bring people into these spaces in a more intimate way, as opposed to being in their cars.
Right.
I think when you travel in the places that you love to be outside of your car traveling, that's ultimately that's the experience that we're getting, is that sense of place that's established with things like the kit of parts and the way pedestrian and bicycles move and the way we would interact with one another outside of our cars.
All right. Anything further on questions or comments at this point? I'm going to we appreciate you being here, Terry, and appreciate the work you guys have done so far, and certainly look forward to the next step in the process and hearing more.
Yeah, well, we appreciate the opportunity. It's been a fun project, and we're happy to put a bow on it. And, you know, we don't like plans to sit on the shelf for 5 years and get dusty either. So we want to make sure that what we're giving you is a workable tool. So we appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you. Somewhat unconventionally, I'm going to ask for a quick break, a little recess here real quick, if that's okay with everybody. Anybody have a problem with that? I'm going to recess the city council meeting for about 5 minutes. Thank you.
Yep.
and others were set to go.
All right. At this time, we'll reconvene the city council meeting. Appreciate the break. And at this time, I know there are folks in the room who have been involved in the process around the 6th Avenue corridor plan. And if anyone's here and would like to address the council, there will be public hearings. Just to note, there are public hearings both before the Planning Commission and the City Council before this thing moves any farther forward. But I know there are folks in the room that were involved in the process. So if anybody has any comments to address the council this evening, you're welcome to do so at this time. Come on up. If you could just give your name and address for the record, and let us know your thoughts.
Claudia Humphreys, Coney Island, 223 South Washington Street. So I want to first say this is a great idea. I absolutely love it. I talked to the developers a minute ago and told them the 3 things that I struggle with on this corridor. I would love to put trees on that street, but I'm going to tell you they're not going to live. Y'all are going to be replacing the trees every 6 months to a year.
On Washington Street?
On Washington Street. And the reason is because people are going to pour Cokes, they're going to pour water, there's going to be, beer, there's going to be all kinds of, they just won't live. And then you're going to have holes in the ground or you're going to replace them. But I'm telling them there are some beautiful metal landscape designs like umbrellas and things like that we can do that will not be a problem. And I mean, and they last for years. They're not a high maintenance. These trees will be, I love trees, and y'all are going to kill a lot of trees. So, and people are going to trip in a hole and break their leg, and that's not going to be good either. So the other thing is at least from 4th Street to University, take the parallel parking away and do 2 things. We get 53-foot trucks 2 to 3 times a day unloading in that street. Now you're one way. So nobody can get down the street. So if we take the parallel parking away, and I don't know if you want to do it all the way down the strip. I mean, I would, because those guys get them too. But if you take it away, make it wider and put a nicer designated bike path, because we have a lot more bikes and scooters. Those scooters are on the sidewalks all the time. So if we take away the parallel parking, make a designated unloading zone for these semi trucks and widen it a little bit for bike, like a real designated bike lane, it may take some of your parking away, but we have 4th Street garage around the corner. There is parking around the area. They just gonna have to get used to not parking in front of the buildings. There's lots of places to park and walk, which is what we're trying to do, is to create the live, work, play where you can walk up and down. It's a pedestrian friendly area. So I would really like to create more of a pedestrian friendly area than a vehicle. It's Mayor Joyce and I have been on. It's dangerous down there, and those kids, I love the Ballards, I love the one-way street, I love to block off 4th Street every Friday and Saturday night of the week for, while the colleges kids are in town. I just think it's safer. There's a couple of businesses that might struggle with that, and that's the only reason why it hasn't been done yet, but those are my big issues, is getting that unloading zone, a real 53-foot semi-truck unloading zone put in there. Please don't put any trees in there. We can come up with some really beautiful ideas along that area that will look just as cool as trees. And then I'm really glad y'all are looking at it. And I love the other Monroe and all that too. So thank you so much for considering it.
Thank you for coming and commenting. Anyone? Any other comments on the corridor plan? Anybody with comments on our other agenda items for tonight? All right, well, we'll move on then to agenda item 3, which is ordinances. We have 2 ordinances tonight on second read. I will. Yeah, why don't you do that?
Okay, so first ordinance up for second read is ordinance 3485, an ordinance amending the Code of Ordinances of the City of Stillwater by amending Chapter 39 Taxation, Article 4 Hotel Room Tax, renaming Article 4 Visitor Tax, amending Section 39271 Definitions, Section 39272 Use of Funds, levying an excise tax of 7% by amending Section 39273 Tax Levied, amending Section 39278 Returns, and Section 39286 Registration Certificates of Authority. So this ordinance was passed to second read by title only. And so in front of you today, you've got an updated proposed ordinance. Make sure I'm looking at the right one. Okay, yes, 3485. So as you'll recall, this is an amendment to the existing hotel room tax. The primary changes is that it changes the name to visitor tax. We've also made an update in the definition section to change the term hotel to lodging, because that more appropriately encompasses all of the different types of places people are staying, so that it's more clear that it's not just a hotel room. We've also made changes to the use of funds section. I'm going to kind of go over broadly all of the changes in the ordinance, and then we'll go back to some specific discussion. The use of funds changes, including changing language to reflect 70% of the proceeds used for long-range strategic destination marketing and management professional services, and 30% of the net proceeds administered by the Stillwater Economic Development Authority as recommended by the Tourism Advisory Committee, and used for development and maintenance of visitor development amenities. Adding a section that the City Council would review the expenditure of funds pursuant to this section on an annual basis, and that any amendment to use of funds would be subject to the requirements of Section 39-291 amendments. Amending the tax levied section, the current hotel tax is 4% of gross rental receipts, and this would increase the rate to 7%. The additional changes in the ordinance are just to clean up those changes in the definition section, so anywhere that references hotel has been changed to reflect the term lodging or lodging facility as readability might require. And also just adding some clarifying language in Section 39-291 amendments, that whenever you submit to the voters a taxing ordinance and the voters also approve how the funds are authorized, state law requires that if you change either the tax rate or the use of the funds, that it will be submitted to approval of the voters. And adding a section that just sets out with certainty that the effective date of this ordinance and approval by city voters required. This section just states that this ordinance would become effective from and after July 1st, 2022, but only once the ordinance is approved by the majority vote of qualified registered voters of the City of Stillwater, voting at a special election called by the City Council that we anticipate will be called for February 8th, 2022. That is an overview of the changes. I have kind of two, I guess, recommendations for discussion before we finalize this ordinance. Are you ready to discuss those?
Please.
Okay.
Actually, any questions generally on the changes?
So the first section I want to draw your attention to is use of funds. This section, the proposed change currently is to delete the language encouraging, promoting, and fostering conventions, conferences, and tourism development, and replace it with funds will be set aside and used exclusively for the purpose of long-range strategic destination marketing and management, professional services, and development and maintenance of visitor development amenities for the city. My concern is that that's very industry-specific language, and I would just want to encourage you to have some discussion about maybe keeping in that first language that's stricken in addition to the new language, just so that perhaps an average citizen understands that the use of these funds, and I think this is in line, it's just a recommendation for discussion, but that really the purpose is still encouraging, promoting, fostering conventions, conferences, tourism development. We've just added some clarification language that's more in line with the industry terms. The other changes I'll point out here is the Tourism Advisory Committee, created by Resolution CETA 2019-2. They're in recommending committee, and they provide advisory to CETA. That is why I've got this amount of money being administered by CETA as recommended by the committee. And further, there was a proposal that perhaps the City Council review the expenditure of funds every 5 years. And I've just recommended that we keep it on the annual basis for two reasons. The first being that as part of the regular budgeting process, we're already reviewing expenditure of those funds on an annual basis. And two, for the simple fact that if we were going to amend the use of funds, it still has to go back to a vote of the people. So if the intention was to look at it every 5 years and see if we need to make an adjustment, that's not something that can be done without another vote. So I leave that to your discussion.
Thank you, Kimberly. I'll just weigh in.
Thank you.
I understand. I mean, the only thing that really I think would need discussion. I mean, the change on the annual thing makes sense, given that it's going to have to go to the vote of the people anyway, and the change around recommending, administered by CETA with the recommendation of the committee, that makes sense. In terms of keeping that other language in, I think that does make sense. I think it's helpful to say the purpose is to encourage, promote, and foster conventions, conferences, and tours of development through the use of long-range strategic destination marketing, management, professional services, just so it's a little clearer for the general public to make sure that they understand what we're using that money for. I don't see I think that.
I think you can put the two sentences together.
Yeah.
Just as you stated, and it keeps it very clear. Yeah.
Do you have a preference of conjunction?
No, I think, so what I'm hearing is that funds collected pursuant to provisions of this article shall be set aside and used exclusively for the purpose of encouraging, promoting, and fostering conventions, conferences, and tourism development through the use of long-range strategic destination marketing and management professional services and development and maintenance of visitor development amenities for the city. ...
Allocated as follows, and then I think you make that change. Well, I don't know if we need it in the.
I think it's fine to put it in the introductory paragraph that's the general purpose of the funds,
Yeah.
and then we can narrow it down to 70% used for, because we said we're going to do it through that, 70% used for this, 30% used for development amenities. So
So it just makes it clear in the preamble that that's what we're paying for.
Okay.
Yep.
I'll make that change.
Any further comments on any of that, councilors? Do we need to amend the title at all?
Yes, so this is just housekeeping. I just want to emphasize on both of these. When we pass the final ordinance, the titles have to be updated, and it's purely administrative just to more closely tie the change to the language in the body. So I'm proposing an updated title for this ordinance, and if there are no other changes, and I will read the updated title into the record if you'd like, and then you can make a motion after that. Does that work for everyone?
Works for us.
Okay, so proposing an updated title for ordinance number 3485 to state: an ordinance amending the Code of Ordinances of the City of Stillwater by amending Chapter 39, Taxation, Article 4, Hotel Room Tax, renaming Article 4, Visitor Tax, amending Section 39-271, Definitions, amending Section 39-272, Use of Funds, levying an excise tax of 7% of gross rental receipts by amending Section 39-273, Tax Levied, amending Section 39-278, Returns, amending Section 39-286, Registration Certificates, Certificates of Authority, amending Section 39-291, Amendments, and providing for an effective date with approval by city voters required.
Councilors, any questions? Can you read the very end of that again, about 291?
Yes. Amending Section 39-291, Amendments, and providing for an effective date with approval by city voters required.
Okay.
The last part of the title regarding providing an effective date with approval by city voters required is what's reflected in the Section 2 of the ordinance.
Mm-hmm. I got it. Okay. Councilors, comments, questions, motion on the ordinance?
Motion to approve staff recommendation of the amendment of the title of ordinance number 3485.
I think you can actually just move to,
Yes,
just like
you
I,
can
yeah.
restate it. No, I'm just kidding.
I think you can just move the adoption.
So
of
we're
the
just
ordinance.
moving to adopt after that reread?
Yes.
Is that what your motion was?
Yes.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to adopt ordinance 3485. 5. Please vote. With a vote of with a vote of 5 to 0, ordinance 3485 is adopted. So to be clear, now that that ordinance is adopted, we will, at our next meeting, have a resolution in place to put it on a ballot so that the public of Stillwater can vote whether that ordinance should actually become effective.
Yes, that will be the next procedural step.
All right. Let's talk about ordinance 3486.
Second read of ordinance number 3486, an ordinance amending the Code of Ordinances of the City of Stillwater by amending Chapter 39 Taxation, Article 3 Sales and Use Tax, Division 6 Transportation Sales Tax to create 2022 Transportation Sales Tax by amending Section 39-238, levying a sales tax of 1% by amending Section 39-239, providing an effective date by amending Section 39-242, and providing for expiration of the tax levied by amending Section 39-244.
And there were no additional changes on this one from the title that we passed on title earlier, correct?
That's correct. There are a few additional, you're looking at a proposed ordinance that's been updated from, I believe, what was originally posted. So just to clarify, there's been some minor changes just to change. There was 2 references to article that should have been division. Those changes have been made. It's just renaming this, creating a 2022 transportation sales tax by changing the date. It's changing, the tax levied is currently 0.5% upon gross proceeds or gross receipts derived from all sales taxable under the sales tax code, and this would increase it to 1%. And providing that under this particular ordinance, there's a separate section in this division providing for the effective date, and you'll see similar language to the last one that the effective date is July 1st, 2022, subject to approval of voters at the special election called for that purpose. And then providing for the expiration of the tax under the duration of tax section. I also have an updated title prepared when you're ready for me to read that.
Councilors, questions? Let's hear the updated title.
Okay, I'm proposing an updated title to ordinance number 3486, an ordinance amending the Code of Ordinances of the City of Stillwater by amending Chapter 39, Taxation, Article 3, Sales and Use Tax, Division 6, Transportation Sales Tax, to create 2022 Transportation Sales Tax by amending Section 39-238, Citation, changing the year of the Transportation Sales Tax, levying an excise tax of 1% of gross proceeds or gross receipts derived by taxable sales by amending Section 39-239, tax levied, providing an effective date by amending Section 39-242, effective date, and providing for expiration of the tax levied by amending Section 39-244, duration of tax.
Councilors, questions, comments, or motion?
Motion to adopt ordinance 3486.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to adopt the ordinance. Please vote. With a vote of 5 to 0, ordinance 3486 is adopted, and the next procedure will be the same.
Yes.
At our next meeting, I have, let's see, reports from officers and boards. Ms. Carnley, is there anything further for you?
Nothing to report.
I think you did your job tonight and appreciate it. Mr. McNichol.
2 items, sir. First, I've been here in Stillwater for a long time. Out and about this last weekend, and let me say that Saturday, I think that we had the largest crowd ever that I have seen here. And I would like to give kudos to our citizens, to our visitors, to our students, everybody that was involved. That was a big night, hyped nationally.
Yep.
And it was, other than some injuries of folks coming over the wall, it was a relatively benign night. And we're very thankful for that. We're thankful to our public safety people that helped keep it benign. And I think it was a great day for both OSU and the City of Stillwater.
Amen.
Yep.
The next item, Block 34 Trust will meet Thursday, December 2nd at 4 p.m. And immediately following that meeting, they will join the rest of us down at Block 34 for a community event beginning at 5 p.m. Leadership from the City of Stillwater and Block 34 Trust will be sharing the first phase of development for that space. And it's a pretty exciting announcement. I think that it's a culmination of what has been envisioned for that block for a long time. And I think folks will be excited about it. I also think that the final results of it will drive additional development downtown. So residents will be able to watch the event live on the City of Stillwater's Facebook page, or attend in person and then stick around for the parade after.
It's very exciting. I'm very excited for that announcement on Thursday, and hopefully folks will be out there or tuning in or taking part. Thank you, Norman.
Thank you.
Vice Mayor Zanotti?
Yes. Mary Main Street is officially here. It kicked off this last weekend. We had weekend 1 of weekend 4. Those domes that are on Block 34 were filled with wonderful vendors. We have a live Christmas tree that you can buy your Christmas trees. We had activities. A shout out to Downtown Stillwater Association for the amazing Christmas tree lighting program they put on. It's an exciting time to be in Stillwater. Weekend 2 will begin this Thursday, and we have the University Store, Linen and Clay, Green Pea Clothing, Varnish and Velvet, and Butterbean as our vendors in the domes. I will tell you that we had one vendor this last weekend sell out of things, could not do on Sunday because she had no more items. So the whole purpose of supporting these small businesses that really are trying to make ends meet and have something special is really exciting. So it is going to be 78 degrees this Thursday evening. So please come out, enjoy Block 34, enjoy the
really?
Christmas parade. Yes. And some other things that'll be happening on Block 34. It's just an exciting time for downtown Stillwater.
That's, really, really exciting. The Christmas tree lighting on Friday was awesome. There were a few hundred people there.
Yeah.
And your work and Shannon's work and the Downtown Association, it's just fantastic, and I'm so glad we've got that back out there this year.
Thank you.
Councilor Hawkins.
Yes, the Christmas tree lighting was fabulous. I'll second that. Tomorrow is Giving Tuesday. Giving Tuesday is a movement that encourages people all around the world to dedicate the Tuesday after Thanksgiving to doing something good. If you're looking for a way to help in our community, the current Leadership Stillwater class is raising funds to create critically important ADA access to the south entrance of the Stillwater Community Center. Visit sccfriends.com to donate or buy tickets to the Back to the 80s fundraiser party happening this Friday.
Back to the 80s. Man. Could be fun. Thank you. Councilor Wedlake.
Yes, sir. The City of Stillwater is one of 5 Oklahoma locations that have been selected to participate in a pilot program that will offer a safer way for community members to dispose of used medical sharps, i.e. needles. Improperly disposed sharps pose grave health and safety risks to residents, sanitation workers, sewage treatment plant operators, waste management personnel, and hospitality workers. Starting December 1st, residents will be able to dispose of used sharps by picking up free containers at the Convenience Collection Center on 9th Street and returning them. This free collection program will run through mid-May 2022.
All right. Excellent. Councilor Jaloski.
Yes. A lot of people know that Stillwater Animal Welfare is a division of the Stillwater Police Department responsible for animal control, which is a public safety measure. But did you know that they also do adoptions? If you are looking to add a furry friend to your family, stop by the Animal Welfare Building at 1710 South Main Street or follow Stillwater Animal Welfare on Facebook for regular updates about what animals are available. I think I saw the Stillwater Fire Department had a furry friend visitor today on Facebook that got to hang out at one of the fire stations. So
great.
it was also looking for a permanent home. So.
We had a furry friend visit our clinic today because my parents adopted a puppy there yesterday. Carl's Wiggle III. So welcome to the family, Carl Wiggles III.
That's excellent news. Thank you. Mr. McNichol, do you have one more thing?
One quick thing, and I think people will understand this based on previous events, both here in Stillwater and nationally. The parade route Saturday night will be locked down at 6 p.m.
Thursday night.
I'm lost on last Saturday still, I guess. But yeah, Thursday night, the 2nd. We'll lock that down at 6 o'clock. So if you want in or you want out, please get your vehicle in or out before 6.
I appreciate that. Thanks for updating us. My announcement is about the holiday parade of lights, which is this Thursday, December 2nd at 7 p.m. But get there early if you want to park close. Bring the whole family to watch floats, community groups, bands, and Santa turn downtown Stillwater into a winter wonderland, even in 78-degree weather. The parade will also be live streamed on the City of Stillwater's Facebook page for those who cannot attend in person. I heard Christy Morrison this morning on the radio said that there were a lot of applications for entries into the parade this year, so that's exciting and should be a lot of fun. So come on out Thursday night. Lots going on Thursday night. That is all we have on the agenda. Is there a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn?
Second.
We have a motion and a second to adjourn the city council meeting. Please vote. With a vote of 5-0, city council meeting is now adjourned. Thank you all for attending.